How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and we have a couple of snowstorms that could be on the way for the Midwest and the Northeast. Let's get right into it by taking a look at next week, towards the middle to late part of next week, because that's when we're going to see a trough come off the Pacific Northwest coast and continue to move further eastward. So I know in my previous videos, I said that the chance of snowfall might be a little bit less likely for at least the next few weeks, thanks to this strong ridge that's built right over the eastern half of the United States. But thankfully, to all those snow lovers out there, we're going to see a pretty big trough that's going to push away that ridge finally. So we finally get to feel more like winter in a lot of these areas. So if we were to continue to move forward with this forecast, so we have two low pressure systems we're taking a look at. We have this upper level low that's located right over the western portion of Mexico that's expected to move further northward thanks to this very persistent ridge that's right over the eastern United States, along with a regular extratropical low pressure system that's going to move westward into the Midwest. Eventually, these two storm systems should converge, and that should lead to a highly unstable environment. And by the way, as well, for the southern United States, you need to be aware of the possibility of severe weather with this much instability. It's very rare for this much cold air and warm air that's right in between the Midwest for severe weather not to happen. So you want to be aware of that going into the Monday and into even the Tuesday timeframe for a lot of these areas. But like I said, this low pressure system will eventually move further northward, will converge with this area of cold air, and that should lead to a pretty large Arctic blast to the point where the jet stream will take a negative tilt right over the Midwest. So we're going to see just a crazy powerful low pressure system thanks to that. When we see a negative tilt like this, you know that stuff is about to get real when it comes to the impacts you're going to see, and this is exactly what we're seeing. So you should expect heavy snowfall this Tuesday and going into Wednesday for much of the northern Midwest. This goes into North Dakota as well as Minnesota, and the winds should be quite strong as well. Be prepared for wind gusts that are anywhere between 40 to 50 miles per hour. However, the snowfall doesn't end there, because we eventually see the snowfall is expected to move eventually into the Midwest as well as potentially areas of the Northeast, where this is a GFS model, by the way. I apologize if I haven't mentioned that yet, but this is the GFS model. But we see that thanks to this negative tilt that builds, thanks to this very strong low pressure system and the strong northwesterly flow, we're seeing that's pretty much forcing the cold Arctic air into this very warm, humid air mass that's located in the southeast. That's going to create a new low pressure system thanks to just how much instability there is. I mean, the atmosphere at this point is just begging to create a storm out of this negative tilt. And this is what we're seeing right here, where we see a new 997 millibar low pressure system develop right over the Great Lakes region, and we see the winds become very strong. The storm pressure decreases, which is representative of how powerful this storm gets, and we see some heavy snowfall at times in portions of northern Michigan and even into portions of upstate New York, more specifically the higher elevations. And eventually the snowfall could move a little bit further southward, where we see snowfall right over Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and even Chicago could get involved with this type of snowfall. Now, this is around 120 hours out. There still could be a decent amount of uncertainty with the forecast, but what I could say with a bit more certainty is that there will, I know this is very vague, but there will at least be a major snowstorm in the Great Lakes region as well as the interior Northeast. That's almost a guarantee at this point. The question remains where exactly that low pressure system will be located. I'm sure many of you guys watching as well are right up along the coastal Northeast cities like New York City, Philadelphia, Boston as well, and they're probably wondering, hey, could this low pressure system have the potential of moving further eastward to bring snowfall to those cities? Well, at this point, I'll say it's unlikely, thanks to the fact that we're going to see a pretty strong ridge and Greenland block, I should say, right over eastern Canada. So it's going to be very difficult for the cold air to be able to move further eastward without being diverged by the strong southerly westerly flow that would be associated with the Greenland block that should be located right over eastern Canada. So that makes it a little less, that does make it unlikely we're going to see the snow move far east enough. I won't rule out that possibility completely. Maybe you guys could see maybe light snowfall, maybe no accumulation out of this along the eastern United States cities, but I wouldn't hold your breath on that as of right now, as all the computer models are leaning towards the idea that this Greenland block located in eastern Canada will be a little bit too strong and a little bit too persistent when it comes to staying right over eastern Canada, and it's sort of representative of what we've been seeing over the past like month or two with a very strong ridge in eastern Canada. In this case, this ridge will be a little bit weaker and move further eastward finally for once, but not far east enough to bring snowfall to the major cities. So I wouldn't hold your breath on that, at least for the Interstate 95 corridor cities. But stay tuned. There's still always that possibility. Weather is very unpredictable, especially when we go out around 5 days out. So stay tuned for more updates. But I'll still say it's less likely at this point. Now, how about for the Midwest? I will say that for places like Ohio and even the more populated cities like Cleveland, Detroit, as well as Chicago, you're more likely to receive snowfall accumulation out of this, and it could potentially be heavy. In the GFS model scenario, it's mainly expecting out of this around 1 to 3 inches of snowfall, maybe localized areas where it's around 3 to 5. I would say that would be more likely right over northern Indiana and the northwestern portion of Ohio. So right now it isn't extremely heavy, but the European model shows a different scenario, which would bring far more snowfall to the Midwest. But before I show you guys that, let me go even more forward with the forecast, because I want to show you guys another point, because eventually of course we see this upper level, we see this new low pressure system form, but then another low pressure system form. So this negative tilt isn't going anywhere over the next few days of next week, which means that we're going to see a very persistent pattern right over the northeast that's just going to bring potentially heavy snowfall in a lot of these areas right up along the interior northeast, and especially right around the Great Lakes region, as we could potentially see a pretty potent lake effect snow threat, especially where like I said, this negative tilt is gonna create a pattern where this low pressure system is gonna stay stuck, and the ridge is just gonna be very persistent on making this low pressure system stay stuck over the same area for several days, which I think could contribute to heavy snowfall accumulation over a prolonged period in many of these areas. And it doesn't help either that we're going to see a small clipper system come from right around the Alberta region of Canada, move southward, and only enhance the instability as well as the negative tilt pattern that's right over the northeast at this time. But we see by Saturday time frame, we still see snowfall in upstate New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and even into the higher elevations of Pennsylvania. And look at how many days this is. The snowfall starts for upstate New York right around Thursday. Friday, the snow continues. Saturday, the snow continues. And even into Sunday, we see the snow continue for portions of upstate New York, which is a very persistent pattern. And we even see some snowflakes stick around up until Monday of the week after. Of course, this is a bit more uncertain at this forecast hour, but most likely places right up along the Great Lakes could see a prolonged period of snowfall. We're going to need to see how powerful the snowfall is, because the wind direction, of course, matters, which will be determined by the position of this low pressure system as well as the strength of this low pressure system. But most likely, you should see a pretty heavy snowfall event in portions of the Great Lakes region. And in the worst areas, I wouldn't be surprised if you see over a foot of snow. In many of these areas, I'll say most of these areas, it will likely hover maybe around 3 to 5 inches in total for the week, because lake effect snow, of course, is very localized. It isn't a very widespread snow event, so many of these areas are unlikely to receive snowfall all this time, but it should at least be a snowy pattern where it's going to be on and off for a lot of these areas. While for some areas it could be very persistent if you're located in the exact right location where the lake effect snow band is at its peak. So definitely keep that in mind throughout the Great Lakes region. Now let's take a look at the snowfall forecast from the GFS model. With that being said, so if we were to continue to move forward with that, you're going to see that the GFS model is forecasting quite a bit of snowfall in the higher elevations. In fact, let me not show you guys this one. Let me show you guys this ratio because it's a bit more accurate. It's a bit more accurate when it comes to the exact amount of snowfall you should see. But still, the GFS model expects well over a foot of snow in the higher elevations of the Adirondacks, the portions of the Catskill Mountains, extending into just to the east of Lake Erie, the higher elevations of Vermont as well, as this could be very, very potent when it comes to the amount of snowfall you receive. Now, if we were to shift our focus to the Midwest, we see the snowfall is a lot lighter. Of course, it's going to be a little bit more difficult in these areas receive lake effect snow, so the snowfall will be lighter, but you still could expect right around 1 to 3 inches of snowfall right between Indiana and Ohio, potentially as far east as Cleveland and Detroit, and potentially as far west as Chicago maybe could get an inch of snow out of this. I'll keep you guys updated once we get a little bit more details when it comes to the forecast because we're still 5 days out, but I think that this should be the general expectation going into next week when it comes to the amount of snowfall. Now let's take a look at the European model, and the European model does show far more snowfall, I should say, for portions of the Midwest. So if we were to continue to move forward, actually let me go to the total snowfall. That's showing me the 6-hour snowfall. So look at this. We see over a foot of snow right over northwestern Ohio and extending into Indiana, as it seems like the European model is expecting just the right amount of precipitation and instability at the right time, which is maximizing the amount of snowfall. And it expects this upper level low that would be located over Michigan to stay over the same area for a more prolonged period and to be a bit more powerful. So we see a snowfall a lot more potent in the European model scenario, which would be definitely a major snowfall threat for those areas. Now, but on the other end, we see that when it comes to the interior Northeast, the snowfall is definitely a lot more localized. I think this is more accurate when it comes to the snowfall the snowfall accumulation forecast you should expect, where mainly the higher elevations are receiving the heaviest snowfall, more specifically the Adirondacks, where you receive over a foot of snow. As I do think the lake effect snow will be a bit more localized than what the GFS model is currently forecasting because it's still early in the year. The temperature is still relatively warm, so I'm having a bit of trouble imagining that the heavier snowfall will be a little bit more widespread and into the lower elevated areas, but so I do believe the European model is more accurate in this scenario, but don't at all disregard the GFS model just yet as well. We need to also take that into consideration, but for the Midwest, there's still, like I said, there's still uncertainty with where exactly the snowfall will fall. I think it'll fall in this general area, but we're gonna have to see how powerful this low pressure system ends up being and how slow it moves thanks to this negative tilt. So here's the GFS model's forecast. So we see same scenario where we see this low pressure system move northward, and we see that this upper level low is a lot more powerful than the GFS model scenario, which is the reason why we see much more snowfall in the Midwest, as we see a very powerful negative tilt out of this. And then when it comes to lake effect snow, like I said, the European model is expecting less, mainly because it expects the cold air to be at a limited, where this eventually transitions into an upper level low, cut off from the jet stream. So of course the cold air will be kept at a minimum, and a minimum enough to a point where the European model isn't expecting as much snowfall. I think it's a bit more accurate, but we're definitely going to need to pay close attention to how the forecast shifts over the next few days, but definitely be prepared for the potential of heavy snowfall in the Midwest as well as the interior Northeast by next week. So based on what we're seeing, the most likely areas that will receive major snow out of this are the pink shaded areas. So definitely be prepared for that if you're right up along the Great Lakes and into portions of Ohio and Indiana. While in the blue areas, it is, I'll still say more likely than not, you're going to receive snowfall. It's just a bit more certain exactly how much snowfall you'll receive. But I'll certainly keep you guys updated over the next several days. Once you get a little bit more of an idea of what's going to happen with this storm system. But that's it for now, guys, and I'll thank you guys for watching.